Hey there, come a little closer to the fire. Let the room be dim. Let the candlelight stay low. And let the modern world loosen its grip on you, one quiet breath at a time. Right now, there are more than 8 billion of us, scattered across the planet like warm lanterns in the dark. Tokyo and Toronto, Lagos and London, islands and deserts, mountain towns and river cities, even research stations on frozen white coasts where almost nothing should live. We have built towers that glitter. We have sent machines beyond the moon. We have mapped the letters inside our own cells. We have learned to split invisible atoms. And we have taught small pieces of metal and light to carry voices across oceans. It sounds like destiny when you say it quickly, as if it was always meant to happen. But it almost did not happen. Not even close. I want to tell you a darker truth tonight. A quiet truth that sits under all our bright achievements. For most of the last 7 million years, there was nothing inevitable about us. There were forests that could have swallowed our line and erased it. Droughts that could have thinned us to nothing. Predators that could have ended the experiment before it ever learned its own name. There were cousins, many cousins, who walked on 2 legs and looked toward the horizon, and then vanished into dust, leaving only a few bones in the hush of the earth. There were moments when the numbers shrank, when the world seemed to narrow, when a whole branch of the family tree trembled in the wind. If you enjoy stories like this, slow and steady, you can tap like on this video and subscribe. It helps the channel keep the candle lit, and it helps these long, gentle nights reach the people who need them. You can also leave a comment with where you are listening from and what time it is there. I always love seeing how far the story travels. Now let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw soften. Let your tongue rest. Breathe in, easy and quiet. Breathe out, longer than the breath in. You do not have to do anything else. Just listen, and let your mind drift back through time as if you were walking down a long hallway in a museum after closing. Your footsteps softened by dust. Your thoughts moving slower with each room. Before we go back to our ancestors, it helps to notice what makes our story feel strange. Most species change in ways that look like simple answers to simple problems. A cat becomes quicker. A deer becomes better at running. A bear becomes better at cold. They specialize. They narrow. They become perfect for one corner of the world. And if that corner changes, they often disappear. Our line did something different. And honestly, I have always found it unsettling in the calmest way, because it means our success was not built on safety. We stood upright, which made us awkward at first, and made birth harder. We lost much of our body hair, which made us vulnerable to heat and cold and biting wind. Our brains grew large, heavy, hungry, demanding fuel and time and care, and that meant our babies arrived unready, soft and dependent, needing a circle of hands around them. Each change was a risk. Each change could have ended us. And still, the risks held. Not because we were the strongest. We were not. Not because we were the fastest. We were not. We were the ones who learned to lean on each other, to share warmth and food and knowledge, to turn fear into planning, and hunger into invention. That is the spine of the story. A calm walk through deep time watching a fragile creature become a creature that can reshape its world without reshaping its body every time the weather shifts. So settle in. Feel the blanket on your skin. Feel the air move softly near the candle. Listen for the smallest sounds, the faint crackle of the fire, the slow breath of the room, the distant hush that tells you night is holding everything still. We are going back, not rushed, not frantic, just steady. We are going back 7 million years, and even farther, to the moment the world was broken open for mammals, and the long chain that leads to you began to tighten, link by link, in the dark. If you were standing here with me, you would see how the flames fold and unfold, how the heat touches the skin of your hands and then retreats, and how the shadows on the wall look almost like tall grass moving in wind. It is easy to forget that for most of our existence, night was not comfortable. Night was a mouth. Night was an open field where you could not see the teeth until they were close. Tonight you are safe, and that safety is part of the story too, because it was earned, slowly, through losses that feel almost too large to hold in one mind. So we will move gently, with respect, because our history is full of vanished faces. You can picture them if you want, not in sharp detail, just as silhouette in a far distance. Small bodies, careful steps, hands that were learning what hands could do, eyes that watched the line of trees, then watched the open ground, then watched each other, as if deciding whether trust could be made into a shelter. Sometimes trust held, sometimes it broke. Sometimes a whole way of being human disappeared without leaving a name. When people say human evolution, they often imagine a straight road. I do not see it that way. I see a braided river. Channels split, channels join, channels dry out. New channels carve themselves through silt, and the whole thing keeps moving, even when it looks still from far above. You can hear that river in your own body, in the way your spine curves, in the way your feet carry your weight, in the way your skin sweats, in the way your throat can shape breath into meaning. None of it was promised. All of it was tested. In the next rooms of our quiet museum, you will meet the earliest primates, small and quick, living in trees, clinging to bark as if bark were a lifeboat. You will feel, in a soft way, why forward-facing eyes mattered, why depth mattered, why a single misjudged leap could become an ending. You will notice fingers learning to oppose, a thumb turning toward the other fingers, a simple motion that changes everything. Because once you can hold something precisely, you can begin to change it. A fruit becomes a meal. A stick becomes an extension of intention. A stone becomes a blade. Later, we will arrive in Africa at a time when the land itself was splitting, when the earth cracked and lifted, when mountains rose and cast long shadows of dryness. Forests broke into patches. Grasslands breathed between them. In that shifting place, an ape stood up more often, not with pride, but with necessity. Standing made the hands free. Free hands carried food. Free hands carried infants. Free hands carried stones. That is how the body begins to lean toward a new kind of mind. And there is something else I want to whisper to you, because it is one of the darkest and most calming truths about our line. We are here because we were good at living through changing weather. Not just storms, but the slow storms of climate, the long swings between wet and dry, the quiet vanishing of familiar trees, the sudden arrival of new predators, the shifting of rivers. When the world changed, many creatures stayed the same, and they paid for it. Our line learned to change behavior, to bend without breaking. That bending became our strength, and also our burden, because it pulled us away from simple lives and into a life of constant making. For now, keep your breathing slow. Let the air come in cool. Let it go out warm. Let the muscles behind your eyes unclench. If thoughts come, let them pass like smoke. You do not need to solve anything tonight. You only need to listen as we step back to the first great hinge in the story. The moment when an older world ended and a new world opened, not with a ceremony, but with dust. There was a day when the sky filled with it, a day when sunlight thinned, a day when the ground shuddered and the ocean rose in strange ways, a day when the largest creatures on land began to lose their footing in a world that no longer fed them. That day was 66 million years ago, and without that darkness, our candle could not be here now. So in the next part, we will walk toward that impact, toward the long, cold hush that followed, and toward the small, warm survivors who waited in burrows and leaf litter, and who would, slowly, become the first quiet ancestors of the primates. I know it is strange to call an extinction event a beginning, but that is how it works in deep time. Endings make space. Space invites experiments. Most experiments fail. A few persist. The ones that persist do not know they are special. They are simply the ones that wake up, find a little food, avoid a little danger, and live long enough to leave another small life behind them. Imagine the old world before that impact. Huge bodies moving through forests, heavy steps, long tails, scales catching heat. Our kind was there too, but so small you could miss it, furred and quick, hiding in the seams of the night. If you held one in your palm, it would have felt like a living heartbeat, a warm secret. It did not rule anything. It did not need to. It only needed to last. Then the rock from space arrived. Not with malice, not with intention, just with speed. And when it struck, the planet did what planets do. It changed. Light became scarce. Plants struggled. Food chains unknotted. The grand shapes of the dinosaurs faded, not in one instant everywhere, but in a cascade that kept going, hour after hour, season after season, until the world belonged to smaller bodies and quieter lives. Those small lives began to climb. They began to look with eyes that faced forward, and they began to reach with hands that could curl and pinch and hold. The trees were a city for them, a place of routes and rules, a place where distance mattered and where memory mattered. If you remember which tree ripens first, you eat. If you forget, you wait, and waiting can be a slow danger. So the brain learned, not like a miracle, like a muscle. A little more wiring, a little more mapping, a little more social awareness, because in groups, you survive better. And in groups, you need to remember faces. And as the millions of years passed, the world kept drifting under their feet. Continents slid like slow ships. Seas opened and closed. Forests expanded, then contracted. When a forest corridor broke, a population became an island of its own, and evolution began to write separate notes in separate margins. This is why there is no single human story. There are always many stories, branching, converging, fading. Even now, when we seem like one species, we carry older meetings inside us, small traces of cousins who once sat by other fires. If any of this feels too wide, bring your attention back to something small. The warmth on your face, the weight of your body in the bed, the steady rhythm in your chest. That rhythm is ancient. It was there in tiny mammals hiding under ferns. It was there in early primates clinging to branches. It was there in the first apes who learned to swing beneath limbs, and in the first hominins who learned to stand. Tonight we are not chasing facts in a frantic way. We are letting the long arc of the narrative settle into you like a blanket, because there is comfort in knowing that the world has changed many times before, and life has found a way to continue, not perfectly, not without loss, but with persistence. That persistence lives in you. You are a descendant of survivors, and the strange part is that survival did not always look heroic. Sometimes it looked like staying still. Sometimes it looked like sharing. Sometimes it looked like leaving a place before it failed. So let us begin the descent into deep time. Let the year numbers become soft. Let the dates become like faint chalk on a blackboard. We will start with the impact. Then we will follow the mammals into the trees. Then we will follow the apes into changing forests. And then we will watch one line step into open ground and keep stepping, one careful foot after another. We will go slowly. We will let the dust settle. We will let the river of time move on. And we will listen for the first quiet primate heartbeat under the ruined sky. In this first stretch of the journey, you do not need to memorize names. You only need to feel the pattern. Catastrophe, then opportunity. Fear, then adaptation. Loss, then the slow return of ordinary days. The dark history of our species begins long before we were a species, in a world of ash and cooling air, where survival was a quiet skill. So keep listening, keep breathing, and step with me into the first chapter of that broken dawn, where the sky is dim and the ground is waiting. The fire beside us will stay steady as we go, and the candlelight will keep returning. A small proof that darkness can be lived with, and understood, and softened into rest. The room stays dim, and the fire keeps its small, steady work, turning wood into warmth, and warmth into a kind of permission to travel. So let us go, not with rushing, with slow, careful steps. 66 million years ago, the world was not waiting for us. It was busy with giants. Forests rang with heavy movement. Shadows were shaped by bodies that could shake leaves with a single breath. If you were there, you might have felt the ground vibrate in your ribs, the way you feel distant thunder before you hear it. And somewhere under all that, in the seams of bark and leaf litter, mammals were already alive, small and quick and mostly invisible, living by night, eating insects, hiding when the day animals passed. They were not planning a takeover. They were simply surviving. Then the sky changed. A rock from space, wider than a city, arrived with silent speed. It struck what is now the edge of the Yucatan, and the impact was so violent that stone turned to vapor, and vapor became dust, and dust rose into the atmosphere like a curtain being pulled across the sun. In the first hours there would have been heat, then darkness, then a cold that did not feel like winter. It felt like the world forgetting how to be warm. Plants struggled when light thinned. Leaves dropped. Forests became quieter. Herbivores starved. Carnivores followed. The great shapes that had ruled the land for more than 100 million years began to fail, not with one dramatic ending everywhere, but with a cascade of ordinary losses that kept adding up. It is a strange thing to imagine, the planet turning its face away from sunlight. But try to picture it softly. A noon that looks like dusk. A dusk that looks like midnight. Ash settling on water. Ash settling on skin. Ash in the folds of ferns. And under that ash, small mammals waiting, heartbeats steady, breath shallow, bodies tucked into burrows, into crevices, into any pocket of safety they could find. They were not heroes. They were quiet, and quiet is sometimes enough. As the months passed, the survivors did what survivors do. They searched. They tasted. They moved. They found the scraps of a changed world and made lives from them. When the giant reptiles were gone, the world did not become peaceful. It became empty. Empty means opportunity, and opportunity means competition. In that new openness, mammals diversified fast, not because they had a plan, but because there were suddenly so many roles to fill. Some became grazers. Some became predators. Some went back to the water. Some dug deeper. And some climbed. Climbing is where our kind begins to feel close. To live in trees, you need to trust your eyes. You need to judge distance. You need to know how far the next branch is. And you need to know it without touching, because touching might be too late. So over time, certain mammals kept their eyes facing forward. Their fields of vision overlapped. Their brains learned to compare the two images and create depth. It is an invisible skill, but it is everything in a canopy. One misjudged leap, and you fall. And in a world with no doctors, no splints, no quiet bed, a fall is often an ending. So the ones who judged well lived more often, and the ones who judged poorly faded. Selection can be brutal without ever being loud. These early primates were small, squirrel-sized, with quick bodies and minds that were just beginning to make maps. They moved at night and in early morning. They listened for birds. They froze when a shadow crossed above. They ate insects and fruit, and sometimes whatever soft leaves they could manage. Their hands were changing too. Claws became less important for some of them, and fingers became more important. Digits that could curl. Digits that could press. And then, slowly, A gift appeared, a thumb that could turn toward the other fingers. Not perfect at first, just enough. Enough to pinch a berry, enough to hold a twig, enough to pick something up and keep it steady. If you have ever held a smooth stone and felt its weight settle into your palm, you know the feeling. Holding changes you. When you can hold, you can carry. When you can carry, you can bring food back to others. When you can bring food back, you can begin to rely on each other in a new way. Time keeps moving, millions of years passing like breaths. The continents drift. Africa and South America separate, slowly, until the ocean between them becomes a barrier that shapes entire destinies. Primates on one side become a different story from primates on the other. In South America, some evolve tails that can grasp, a fifth limb for life in dense forests. In Africa and Asia, others evolve along different lines, and those lines will matter to us later. Around 30 million years ago, the climate shifted again. Forests changed. Woodlands opened. And in that changing world, a new group appeared. The apes. They lost their tails. Their shoulders became more flexible, made for swinging beneath branches. Their brains grew larger relative to their bodies, not because thinking was fashionable, but because remembering where food is, and who is allied with whom, and when danger last came from the east, these are survival skills in a social life. Apes lived in groups, and groups are complicated. In a group, you need to know faces. You need to remember favors. You need to sense mood. You need to watch and learn. The ones who could do this well ate better, stayed safer, and raised more young. I want you to feel how ordinary this is, even when it sounds grand. No one wakes up and decides to become human. A mother teaches a child where to find fruit. A cousin watches another cousin crack something open and tries to copy the motion. A group learns a route to water during a dry season, and that route becomes memory. Memory becomes tradition. Tradition becomes a kind of tool. It is soft at first, but it persists. Then the world cools further. Ice begins to form at the poles more often. Rainforests contract. Open habitats expand. This is hard on forest specialists. Many apes vanish. The family tree thins. But some persist, larger and more flexible, able to move between patches, able to tolerate seasons, able to improvise. And in Africa, geology begins to pull the land apart. A great rift opens. Mountains rise. Those mountains cast a rain shadow. On one side, forests stay thicker. On the other, the world dries. Woodlands become mosaics, trees and grass, shade and open ground. And in that mosaic, the ancestors of chimpanzees and the ancestors of our line stand near the same edge of possibility. And then, slowly, they separate. We do not have a perfect fossil of that last shared ancestor. We have hints. A skull here, a jaw there, a tooth worn down by years of chewing. But the story is clear enough in its outline. One lineage stays closer to the forest, and it remains a master of branches. Another lineage spends more time on the ground, not because it is brave, but because food and water are more scattered, and because moving becomes part of survival. That is the start of the long commitment to upright walking. Not all the time at first, just more often. An ape stands to look over grass. An ape stands to carry something. An ape stands to wade through shallow water. And each time it stands, it learns a little more how to balance, how to place weight on two legs, how to let the hands remain free. If you imagine that first standing, do it gently. A warm afternoon. Light filtered through leaves. The smell of earth after a short rain. A body hesitates, then rises. The spine straightens a little. The head balances differently. The air feels different higher up, cooler, moving across the face. The horizon opens, and the hands, for a moment, are not part of walking. They are available. That availability will become one of the most expensive gifts in our history, because once hands are free, the mind begins to ask, what else can be done? Stay with the calm. Let these millions of years move through you like slow water. In the next part, we will meet the first clear faces of our lineage, the early hominins, and we will watch bipedalism become more than a trick. We will watch it become a way of life, and we will see how a small, upright creature survives among predators by learning to cooperate, to remember, and to endure. You might notice your own hands resting somewhere as you listen. Those hands are old, not in years, but in inheritance. They are built from the same pattern that began in the canopy, when a thumb first turned inward and made precision possible. And here is the unsettling part that I find oddly soothing. Once you accept it, the hand did not become clever because it wanted to. The hand became clever because a branch demanded it, because fruit demanded it, because falling demanded it, because a life that lasts long enough to raise young often depends on tiny motions done correctly. If you could walk through the museum halls of deep time with me, we would pause at a glass case where a small skull rests. Not our skull. Not yet. A skull that once held a brain no larger than a modern chimp, and yet it carried the beginning of our posture. The hole where the spine enters sits a little more under the head. Not all the way. Just a little. A quiet hint that the head was starting to balance on something more vertical. We would not be certain from that skull alone. We rarely are. Hair does not fossilize. Soft tissue does not fossilize. Even behavior leaves only faint tracks. So we learn to be patient, and we learn to say, we cannot be sure, and we learn to let uncertainty be part of the lullaby. There is comfort in uncertainty because it keeps the story human. Some scholars argue that the first steps toward upright walking happened in woodland shade, not on open savanna. Others emphasize heat and sun, standing tall to reduce the surface that the midday sky can burn. Others point to feeding, reaching higher into branches, carrying food without dropping it. There are even suggestions of wading, of moving through shallow water where standing feels natural. It is debated, and it is likely that many small reasons pulled in the same direction. Evolution is rarely a single lever. It is more like many fingers pressing gently, over and over, until a shape changes. As the line leans toward the ground, it pays a price. Two legs free the hands, but two legs are a narrow base. Balance becomes a daily practice. Hips change. Feet change. The spine learns curves. The muscles that hold the pelvis steady learn a new role. And predators do not pause while anatomy learns. So the earliest bipedal walkers probably lived with a constant quiet alertness. Ears turning toward brush. Eyes scanning for movement. A pulse that quickens at sudden sounds. A climb back into trees when night comes. A sleep that is light, interrupted, shared. You can picture a small group settling into a patch of trees at dusk. The air cools. Insects begin their faint work. A distant cat coughs, not loud, but enough. The group gathers closer, not because they are sentimental, but because closeness is a wall. A child presses against an adult. An adult keeps a hand on the child without looking. A simple touch. A small anchor. This is where human softness begins. Inside the need to survive together. Not romance. Not ideology. Just the practical warmth of bodies in a world that can be cruel. And the world does not stop changing. Wet years come. Dry years come. Rivers shift. Lakes expand and shrink. Volcanoes lay down ash that will one day hold footprints like pressed signatures. The wind moves dust across plains. Dust settles on leaves and then is washed away. Dust settles on skin and then is brushed away. Dust becomes a motif of time itself, because it is what remains when the living are gone. You might be thinking of famous names, of Lucy, of the footprints in Tanzania, of those moments when evidence feels so close you can almost touch it. We will get there. We will take it slowly. For now, we are still in the long prelude, when the family is only beginning to become separate from the other apes. The Rift Valley is carving its shadow. The mosaic habitats are spreading. And somewhere in that landscape, a lineage begins to commit. This commitment is not dramatic. It is a small increase in how often a body chooses 2 legs instead of 4. It is a slight shift in bone angles. It is a pelvis that becomes a little broader. It is a knee that learns to bring the feet under the center of mass. It is a big toe that turns forward, not fully yet, but more than before. It is the slow disappearance of a tail in earlier ape ancestors, leaving balance to muscles and tendons instead. It is the gradual building of a body that can walk far, which means a mind that can remember far. In the next part, we will step closer to the first hominins we can name, and we will feel the early awkwardness of bipedal life, the way it carried both danger and promise. And we will let the long silence of deep time keep us calm as we move forward. The fire keeps a steady sound, a small crackle that never hurries, and it helps us stay calm while the years stretch into distances the mind cannot really measure. Now we move into a chapter where the bones begin to speak more clearly, where the ground itself keeps a record, where you can almost feel a footfall that happened so long ago it should have vanished, around 4 million years ago, and then closer to 3 million years ago. The hominins of Africa were no longer only experiments. They were communities that lasted. They were lineages that filled landscapes. They were small bodies with upright habits, living in woodlands and open patches, always near the edge of danger and always near the edge of hunger. Their world was not a stable stage. It was a shifting mosaic. Seasons growing stronger, rain coming in pulses, dry months lengthening, and the trees that once formed continuous shelter breaking into islands of shade. In a world like that, walking matters. Not dramatic running, not hero speed, just the steady ability to move from one patch of food to the next without wasting too much energy. To carry a child for a while, to bring back a handful of fruit or a piece of root, to keep the hands free for small tasks that add up to survival. This is where we meet the Australopithecines, the southern apes. I want you to imagine them as silhouettes first, not as monsters, not as cartoons, just small, upright figures in pale light. They were short, many of them barely more than a meter tall, with arms still long enough to climb, fingers still curved from generations of branch life, and yet their hips and knees and feet were learning the rhythm of the ground. They were not built for dominance. They were built for endurance in a hard world. There is one fossil that became famous because it gave us more than a hint. It gave us a body. In Ethiopia, in the Afar region, researchers found a skeleton that was incomplete, but still astonishingly whole compared to most discoveries. They called her Lucy. Her bones are quiet evidence. A pelvis shaped to support organs while standing, a knee angled in a way that brings the foot under the body, a spine that could balance the head on top, and feet that were no longer meant to grasp branches the way an ape foot does. If you picture her walking, do it gently, a slow pace, careful steps on uneven ground, toes pressing into dust, heel touching first, weight rolling forward, the body swaying a little, not like a modern stride, but not like a clumsy stumble either. A compromise that worked well enough to live. Lucy did not live alone. Her species and other close relatives lived for hundreds of thousands of years, long enough for childhoods to be raised and elders to age, long enough for drought years and good years to come and go. You can almost sense the routines. Morning light, cool air on the skin, a group moving together, not in a line like soldiers, but in loose closeness, stopping to pick, stopping to listen, stopping to chew tough food with thick enamel teeth. At night, the question was always safety. Some likely climbed. Some likely stayed close to trees and used height as escape. Predators were everywhere, and a small hominin on open ground was never fully relaxed. That tension is part of the story too, because nervous systems learn. They learn patterns of risk. They learn the value of watching. They learn the value of staying together. And then there are the footprints. In Tanzania, at Laetoli, volcanic ash fell and made a smooth, pale surface. Soon after, 3 individuals walked across it. 2 larger, 1 smaller, their feet pressed into the ash. Hail then arch, then twos, and the ash kept the shape, and then another layer covered it, sealing a brief moment under the earth for more than 3 million years. When you stand in your mind beside those prints, you feel something intimate. It is not a skull on a table. It is a walk, a family moving, a direction chosen, a small child trying to match the pace of an adult. The ground remembers what the air forgets. Those footprints show something important. By that time, bipedalism was not a rare trick. It was a normal way of moving. The feet show a strong heel strike, an arc, a toe that pushes off forward. This was a body that had committed, even if the arms still remembered the trees. So the question of why remains, and we can keep it soft. Some scholars argue the upright posture helped with long-distance movement between scattered trees. Some point to carrying food in infants and useful stones. Some point to heat, less surface exposed to the high sun. Some point to social display. A body that can stand tall can also signal. It is debated, and it may be that the answer is not one answer, but a collection of small advantages that together outweighed the cost. As these hominins spread, they also diversified. In East Africa, one form. In South Africa, another, similar in size, similar in brain volume, similar in the broad outline of their lives, but with differences in skull shape, tooth size, limb proportions. Evolution was trying multiple versions at once, like a river splitting into channels. Some channels would last. Some would dry. Around 2.5 million years ago, another kind of Australopithecine appeared, more robust, with jaws that looked heavy, molars that looked like grinding stones, and sometimes a bony crest on top of the skull where massive chewing muscles could attach. These were specialists in tough plant foods, roots and tubers, and hard seeds, the kinds of calories that survive drought but demand work to process. It is tempting to imagine them as brutes, but they were simply adapted to a harsh menu. They found a niche and filled it. For a long time, robust and gracile forms lived in the same broad regions, not as copies, but as different answers to the same climate. Meanwhile, something else was stirring, not in bones alone, but in stone. For a long time, tool use is hard to prove. Animals can pick up rocks. They can pound. They can throw. But at some point, something began to strike stone in a deliberate way, producing sharp flakes that could cut. The earliest known stones that look clearly shaped by intention date to more than 3 million years ago. They are simple, but simple can still be revolutionary. A sharp edge opens a hide. A sharp edge slices meat from a bone. A sharp edge scrapes plant fibers. A sharp edge changes the limits of the body. And when limits change, minds change too. We cannot always say which species held the first flake. The fossil record does not give us a clear hand in the moment, but the landscape gives us a clue. If tools appear where Australopithecines lived, then some Australopithecines may have been the first to discover the secret of fracture. Or another unknown cousin may have done it, a cousin whose bones have not been found. That uncertainty is part of the hush. It reminds us that the story is bigger than our collections, and that deep time keeps many names hidden. What we can say is that by the end of this Australopithecine era, the stage had changed. Hands were free. Walking was normal. Groups were learning routes. Diets were broadening in some lineages. Brains were starting to inch upward, not yet to modern size, but enough to matter. And the world was becoming more unstable. with swings of wet and dry that punished specialization and rewarded flexibility. In that pressure, one lineage began to lean away from massive teeth and toward something else, toward smaller jaws, toward more planning, toward the first true humans. I have always found it strange that we can hold an object in a museum, a fragment of bone, and feel a quiet tremor in the chest, as if time itself leans closer. If you were standing here with me, you would hear a kind of hush that only museums have. The soft footfalls on polished floors, the distant cough, the slow turning of pages in a corner, and then the glass case with a small label, and inside, the curve of a pelvis, the arc of a rib, the shape of a knee. Dust is everywhere, even in places that look clean. Dust is the most honest witness. It settles on stone, on bone, on old wood, on our own sleeves. It is the same dust that once drifted across a savanna wind, and the same dust that filled the spaces between those Laetoli footprints before they were sealed. When Lucy was found, it was not a single dramatic moment, like in a movie. It was a slow gathering. A gully walked again and again. A glance downward. A pale shape in the soil. Then another. Then another. A careful brushing. A hand holding breath. And then the realization that this was not a single tooth or a fragment of jaw, but a pattern of parts that belonged together. I like to imagine the evening after that kind of day. Not celebration, not loudness, but a tired quiet. A lantern, a mug of water, notes written slowly. The feeling of being very small under a huge sky, because the bone on the table is a doorway, and the doorway opens into a world that is still alive in the mind. In that world, the air smells of sun-warmed grass and crushed leaves. There are insects. There are distant calls of birds. There is the sound of something large moving in brush, unseen. A group of Australopithecines moves carefully, never fully relaxed. You can feel how their attention shifts. A head turns. A pause. A soft grunt that is not language yet, but is still communication. The child lingers. An adult waits. The group does not leave the child behind. That matters. Even before large brains, social bonds are already doing their slow work. When food is found, it is not a feast. It is small pieces. A fruit that must be checked for bitterness. A root that must be dug with fingers, sometimes with a stone, sometimes with a stick. The fingers get coated in clay. The nails collect dark soil. If there is water, it is precious. A shallow pool that reflects sky like broken glass. A stream that makes a narrow sound. The breath of a river that will outlast everyone. They drink quickly. They listen while they drink. They know that water attracts more than thirst. Think too about their bodies at night. Without fire, the darkness is thicker. Cold settles into the low places. The skin cools. Small bodies lose heat fast. A cluster of sleep becomes a strategy. Shoulders touching. Breath shared. A rustle of hair. A shift of weight. A distant roar. Then silence again. This is the quiet terror of living on a planet that does not care. And yet they persist. They wake. They stand. They walk again. The robust forms, with their heavy jaws, were living a different kind of patience. They could survive on foods that others might ignore. Gritty stems, hard seeds, underground storage. You can almost hear the grinding, the slow crunch, the steady work of molars. It is not glamorous. It is survival. And for a long time it worked. But the gracile lineages, the ones with lighter faces and more varied diets, carried a different potential. They could shift their menu when a drought came. They could sample. They could improvise. In a changing climate, improvisation is often the most valuable skill. And improvisation does not have to start in the mind alone. Sometimes it starts in the hand, in the feel of a rock, in the discovery that one stone breaks another in a way that leaves an edge sharper than teeth. I want you to picture the first time someone noticed that, not as genius, as accident. A stone dropped, a sharp flake produced, a finger cut, a small sting, then curiosity, a flake held carefully, a test on bark, a thin peel lifted away, a new possibility, then repetition, a learned motion, the kind of learning that needs watching and practice and time. A child observing, a child copying, a child failing, an adult correcting with a gesture. No words, perhaps, but still teaching. Once a group can make sharp edges, they can change how they eat. They can open tough skins. They can slice. They can scrape. They can access calories that are otherwise locked behind hide and fiber. And calories are not just food. Calories are time. They are warmth. They are the ability to carry a child a little farther. They are the ability to keep a brain alive even when the day is long and the water is far. So the Australopithecine era is not a quiet preface. It is a long struggle, a long apprenticeship. Millions of years where bodies learn to stand, where feet learn to bear weight, where hands learn to explore, and where the world keeps changing under them. When you feel sleepy, it can help to imagine that deep time as a slow tide. It comes in. It goes out. It leaves patterns, footprints, bones, the stones, and then it covers them again, gently, patiently, as if the earth itself is tucking the evidence away. So as you rest, let the footprints fade into the distance behind us, not lost, only covered, like ash under ash. Ahead, we will follow the first stone tools that appear again and again. We will listen to the sound of rock against rock, and we will watch a new name enter the story. Homo. The next name arrives softly, not as a crown, not as a triumph, but as a whisper in dust. Homo. It means human, and yet these first humans were still close to their earlier kin, still small, still vulnerable, still living by attention and caution. What changes is not a sudden miracle. It is a habit of making tools before they are needed, a habit of looking at the world as something that can be shaped. Around 2.5 million years ago, stone tools become more common. Not everywhere, not all at once, but often enough that the earth begins to keep a pattern. Sharp flakes, cores with edges, hammerstones that show repeated impacts. Archaeologists call the earliest widespread tradition the Older One. It is a simple toolkit, but simple can be powerful, and power can be quiet. The bodies of these early humans were changing too. Compared with many Australopithecines, their faces were becoming a little flatter, their teeth a little smaller, their hands a little more suited to precision. Their brains were larger, not enormous, not yet, but clearly expanding. A few hundred cubic centimeters might sound small to a modern mind, but in evolution it is a major expense. A brain is hungry. It demands calories even when the body is resting. So if the brain grows, something must pay for it. That payment came from food quality and from tools that let food be processed outside the mouth. If you can cut meat instead of tearing it with teeth, you can eat faster. If you can scrape hide, you can reach fat. If you can break long bones, you can reach marrow. Marrow is dense energy, quiet gold inside a hard shell. It is the kind of energy that can keep a growing brain alive. And once brains grow, they allow better tools. And better tools allow better food. And the loop turns again. Slowly, steadily, like the turning of a wheel in low light. It is tempting to imagine these early humans as fearless hunters. But much of the evidence suggests they were often scavengers. Not weak, not passive, but cautious opportunists. If a lion kills a zebra and leaves, if hyenas tear and move on, if vultures lift into the sky and the air becomes still, then a small group can approach, quickly, eyes wide, bodies tense. The smell is heavy. Blood and dust, flies in the sun, and yet the tools make it possible to take something valuable in a short time. Picture that scene with me. Slowly, a group waits at a distance. They watch the larger predators. They wait for the moment when danger shifts away. Then they move. Footsteps in dry grass. A soft clack of stone in a hand. A glance to the left. A glance to the right. One individual keeps watch while another kneels. The kneeling one does not kneel like a modern person. The posture is different. Lower. More ready to spring. A flake touches hide. The edge slides. A line opens. Warmth escapes into air. A strip of flesh is freed. Not much. Enough. Someone else lifts a limb and sets it down with care. Then a hammerstone comes down. Once, twice, 3 times. A crack. A split. The inside of the bone is pale, and the marrow can be scooped, and it can be eaten quickly. The group does not stay. They take what they can carry. They move away to a safer place, perhaps a rocky rise, perhaps a line of trees, perhaps a shallow gully where they can see and also hide. This is not glory. This is survival by timing. These tools also changed what hands could do. A stone flake is small, but it demands a grip that is control. It asks for thumb pressure. It asks for a wrist that can hold steady. So bodies that could do that gained an advantage. Over generations, hands became more human in shape. Not perfect, but trending toward precision. And with precision comes planning. Not only in the making of tools, but in the carrying of them. To carry a tool is to expect a future moment. That expectation is a kind of thought that reaches beyond the present. Alongside tools and diet, something else was lengthening. Childhood. In many mammals, the young grow quickly, become independent quickly, reproduce quickly. But in humans, even early humans, learning became more important, and learning takes time. When a technique matters, when making a tool matters, when tracking the movements of larger predators matters, then the young must observe and practice. A longer childhood is costly. It means years of feeding and protection, but it also means a mind that can absorb more knowledge. You can see hints of this in teeth, in growth patterns, in the way juvenile remains compare to adult ones. It is not a neat line, but the trend is there. The species is becoming a species that learns. There is also the social side of this new life. Scavenging is safer in groups. Tool making spreads better in groups. Knowledge lasts longer in groups. A group can remember a water hole that still flows in a dry season. A group can remember which stones fracture well. A group can share food with a mother who is nursing, with an elder who cannot move fast, with a child who is still small. These are not modern morals. They are practical bonds. But practical bonds can become feelings, and feelings can become culture. The climate in Africa did not make any of this easy. During this span, wet and dry cycles intensified. Grasslands expanded, then retreated. Forests shrank, then returned. Resources shifted. Populations rose and crashed. In such a world, specialization can be deadly. A species that eats one food well may starve when that food fails. A species that can switch, that can use tools, that can travel, that can cooperate, has better odds. So natural selection favored flexibility. And flexibility is not only in muscles, it is in minds. Over time, the tools themselves show more regularity. The Oldowan tradition appears again and again. Not identical pieces, but similar strategies, similar angles, similar ways of striking. This suggests teaching. Not in words we can hear, but in demonstration. Hands guiding hands. Eyes watching. A child given a stone and allowed to fail. Failure is part of the process. If you have ever tried to learn a skill, you know the quiet frustration of it. The same feeling existed then. A flake breaks wrong. The edge is dull. The core fractures in a useless way. Then another try. Then another. And eventually the hand learns the angle. Eventually the stone yields. Some researchers argue there were multiple early human forms at this time, not just one. The fossils are fragmentary. A skull here, a jaw there, a face that looks slightly different, a brain case a little larger. It is debated how many species names we should use. But the broader truth stays steady. Between about 2.5 million and 1.5 million years ago, human evolution was experimenting. Different bodies, different diets, different strategies. Some lines persisted. Some vanished. The earth kept only a few bones and a scattering of tools, and we try to rebuild whole lives from those remains. There is a quiet sadness in that. Most of the individuals who lived are lost. Names lost. Voices lost. Yet their choices shaped what came after. A sharp flake. A shared meal. A child taught. These small acts are the foundation of everything. As brains grew, bodies began to change in a way that would soon become obvious. Legs lengthened in some lineages. Arms shortened relative to the body. The torso became more suited to long walking. The shift was slow, but the direction was clear. A new kind of human was taking shape, one built not for climbing, but for crossing open ground. And with that change came a new relationship with heat. To walk far under a high sun, a body must shed heat. Sweat becomes important. Water becomes important. Shade becomes important. A group must know where the streams run, where the seasonal pools form, where a river breathes through dry months. Memory becomes a survival tool. Not only memory of food, but memory of water. Honestly, when I think about those first tool makers, I do not imagine a bright invention moment. I imagine patience. I imagine someone sitting near a riverbank where the water has exposed cobbles, turning stones over in the hand, feeling weight, feeling texture, looking for the kind of rock that breaks the right way. Not every stone is willing. Some crumble. Some split into useless chunks. Some refuse, taking the force and giving nothing back. But some, flint, quartzite, basalt, they hold a secret geometry, and with the right strike, they open. If you were standing there, you would hear the simple music of it. A tap, a sharper crack, a flake skittering across grit, then another tap. The smell is not strong, but it exists. A faint mineral scent, dust rising, settling on eyelashes, settling on the tongue. Hands become gray. A small cut appears, and it stings when sweat touches it. The maker licks the cut, then keeps working, because time is short and the group will move again. Near places like Olduvai Gorge, the ground itself is layered with memory. Sediments, ash, river deposits. Every layer a season, every layer a climate, every layer a quiet record of who passed through. Tools left behind are not trash. They are traces of attention. And animal bones with cut marks are not just bones. They are a diary of meals, written in scratches. When a group eats, it is not like a modern meal. There is no table. There is no neat sharing. There is crouching. There is quick chewing. There is scanning the horizon between bites. But even in that urgency, there can be moments of stillness. A child watches an adult scrape fat from hide. An adult watches the child, making sure the child does not wander toward danger. A mother holds a small body close, the warmth of skin and breath the private shelter. An elder sits slightly apart, not excluded, just slower, eyes still useful, ears still sharp. Groups that keep elders alive, keep memory alive. And memory is the map that leads back to water. Some days there is plenty. A carcass found at the right time. Enough marrow to quiet hunger. Enough meat to share. Other days there is only roots and seeds. And the stomach feels hollow. And the world feels louder. Because hunger sharpens sound. In those lean times, the temptation is to fight. But fighting within the group wastes energy. So cooperation becomes a strategy, even when it is hard. A peace offered. A gesture that says, wait. A look that says, I see you. It is not poetry. It is a way to get through the night. And all the while, the sky keeps changing. Some years the rains come. Grass grows tall. Herbivores gather. Predators follow. Other years the rains fail. Dust rises. Plants dry. Animals move away. For a small human group, that means travel. It means remembering roots. It means leaving a familiar shelter and walking into the unknown. If you have ever felt that uneasy feeling of packing up in darkness, not knowing where you will sleep next, you know a small piece of what they lived with. They did it again and again, generation after generation. Each move a test. This is why the story of early Homo can feel dark, even when we keep the language gentle. It is a story of constant risk. It is a story of thin margins. A broken ankle can be death. A fever can be death. A wrong choice of water can be death. So the safest groups were the groups that shared information and shared effort. And slowly, almost invisibly, that shared life began shaping minds that could hold more than the moment. Minds that could hold plans. You can feel the approach of the next chapter in the way bodies change. In the way hips narrow and legs lengthen. In the way feet become better springs. In the way shoulders settle into a posture meant for walking. The ground becomes their main home. The trees are still there, but the future belongs to those who can cross the open spaces between them. So keep resting. Let the fire in this room stay steady. Let the image of stone in a hand be simple and real. Soon we will follow those longer legs out toward new horizons, toward a species that will travel farther than any of its ancestors ever dared. In a way, these stones are the first candles of our story. Small, hard lights, not of flame, but of possibility. And they glow in the mind when everything else grows dark. All of this leads toward a figure that will feel suddenly familiar in outline. A tall youth near a lake. Long legs. A body that looks almost like a modern runner if you do not look at the skull. This is the next turning. The arrival of Homo erectus. But before we meet that long-striding traveler, let the image of the older one flake rest in your mind. A small, sharp crescent of stone, cooled in your palm, carrying the quiet promise that the future can be shaped. Let your breathing stay slow. Let your shoulders soften. And imagine the night air of ancient Africa cooling the stones as the group sleeps, waiting for morning. The long road is beginning, step by step, and you can drift with it, safely, quietly. As the fire watches, the room is still warm from the hearth. and the shadows on the wall move in a slow rhythm, as if time itself is breathing. Now the story steps into a new body, a body that could walk for hours without collapsing, a body that belonged to a new kind of human, one that carried the past forward and also quietly left it behind. Around 1.9 million years ago, in the landscapes of East Africa, a taller figure began to appear, not towering like a giant, but tall enough that the world looked different from that height. The legs were longer, the arms shorter in proportion, the hips narrower, the rib cage more barrel-shaped, and the whole frame looked built for travel. If you were watching from a distance, you might think of a modern runner, except the head would still be different. Lower forehead, heavier brow, a skull shaped by older chapters. We call this figure Homo erectus, upright human, a name that sounds simple, but it marks a profound shift. There is a fossil that makes this shift feel real in the mind. A young individual whose bones were found near a lake in Kenya, near the long water of Turkana. He was a child when he died, maybe 8 or 9, and yet his skeleton tells us what he would have become. His limbs were long, his posture was made for walking, and the shape of his body suggests endurance. Days of movement under open sky. When researchers laid out his bones, they saw something close to our own outline, and they understood that this was not a climbing ape that sometimes walked. This was a traveler that lived on the ground. With a body like that, the map of Africa changes. Distances that once felt enormous become possible. A group can follow herds longer. A group can reach water sources that are farther apart. A group can carry more, not only food, but stones chosen for tool making, and fuel, and even small children, shifting weight from arm to arm as they walk. This is not comfort, it is capability. Erectus also carried a larger brain than the earliest humans, not the size of ours, but larger than before, and the shape mattered. The front of the brain, the parts tied to planning and sequence, was expanding. A tool is not only a sharp edge, it is a plan that becomes an object. And in this era, tools begin to show a new kind of pattern. For a long time, the old simple flake tools were enough, but then we begin to see hand axes, shaped stones that look like teardrops, worked on both sides, balanced in the palm. These were not random breaks. They were choices, strike after strike, guided by an image held in the mind. A hand axe can cut meat, scrape hide, chop wood, dig roots. It is a tool that can do many things, and that versatility is part of why it lasted so long. Across vast distances and across enormous spans of time, the same general form appears again, suggesting teaching, memory, and a shared way of working stone. Imagine someone making one of these tools. They sit on the ground where the light is soft, with a core stone in one hand and a hammer stone in the other. They turn the core. They test the edge with a thumb. They tilt it, then a strike. A flake jumps free and skitters across dust. They strike again. Not too hard, not too soft. A rhythm forms, and the sound is clean. Stone on stone, and the smell is faintly mineral, like dry rain on rock. Their hands are steady, their shoulders relaxed, but their eyes stay aware, because the world is still dangerous. Toolmaking is also a kind of calm. It gives the mind something to hold. In a life where the weather shifts, where predators move, where children cry, a task with a clear sequence can feel like a small island of order. Strike, turn, strike, turn. When the tool is finished, it fits the hand, and the hand remembers how it was made. Erectus did more than refine stone. They changed their relationship with fire. Fire existed long before humans. Lightning and dry grass, sparks and wind. But to live with fire is different from seeing it. To live with fire means keeping it, feeding it, carrying it, guarding it from rain, and choosing where it should be allowed to breathe. It is possible that early Erectus first learned to capture fire from natural sources. A branch taken from a burning tree, embers wrapped in damp plant matter, carried carefully to the next shelter. Later, they may have learned to make it. The evidence is debated, but what is clear is that fire becomes part of their lives in a sustained way. In caves and open sites, layers of ash appear. Not a single accident, but repeated use. A place where flame returned again and again. When you picture an Erectus camp at dusk, the fire is the center. The light is small, but it changes everything. Darkness becomes less absolute. Cold becomes less sharp. Predators keep their distance. A group can sit together longer, and in that longer evening, something subtle happens. People look at each other. Hands gesture. Food is shared. A child listens, watching mouths and hands, watching the way a task is demonstrated. If language was growing, the fire would have been the quiet place where it could grow. Because the group is close, the night is long, and safety allows attention to turn inward. Fire also changes food. Cooking makes meat easier to chew and digest. It makes roots softer. It reduces some dangers. It turns a tough meal into something the body can process more efficiently. Some researchers think this matters for brain growth, because brains need energy, and cooked food yields more usable calories. We cannot be sure of every step, but the direction is plausible, and it fits the pattern of a species becoming increasingly dependent on culture, on learned behavior, on shared technique. With a traveling body, with reliable tools, and with fire, Erectus did something that feels like a quiet thunder. They left Africa, not a single dramatic departure, but a series of small movements, a group following food a little farther, then their children settling farther still. Over hundreds of thousands of years, Erectus spread into the Middle East, into Eurasia, into places where the air was colder and the seasons were sharper. Fossils in Georgia, in China, in Indonesia, show their presence. A skull cap here, a jaw there, tools in the ground, ash in a cave. Each discovery is a footprint in a larger migration. It is strange to think of these early travelers crossing unfamiliar lands without maps, without written memory, guided only by the slow knowledge of a group, and the pull of water, and the movement of animals. But in a way, that is how all migration begins. Not as a conquest, but as a search for enough. Enough food, enough water, enough shelter. And when a group finds a place that holds those things, they stay. And when it fails, they move again. As Erectus spread, they encountered new climates. In warmer zones, the challenge was heat and water, and in cooler zones, the challenge was cold nights and shorter summers. Fire helped. Clothing may have begun as simple wrapping, hides pulled close, not yet sewn and fitted, but enough to block wind. Shelter may have been simple too, branches arranged, stones piled, a windbreak against the night. These are small inventions, but small inventions keep bodies alive, and keeping bodies alive keeps knowledge alive. One of the most tender traces of Erectus life comes from the evidence of care. At a site in Georgia, an individual was found who had lost most of their teeth long before death. Without teeth, they could not chew tough food, and yet they lived for years. Someone must have softened food for them, shared the easier pieces, stayed near them. This is not romance. It is a practical kindness, and it suggests that community had deepened. An older member might carry memory, roots, water knowledge, tool knowledge. Keeping that person alive can keep a group alive. So care is not only emotion, it is survival strategy. And still it feels like something more, because it shows a recognition that a life can matter even when it is weak. Over time, Erectus did not remain fixed. In Africa, populations continued to change, brain size trending upward, faces becoming less projecting, bodies remaining tall and mobile. In Europe, populations adapting to colder conditions began moving toward heavier builds. In Asia, some Erectus groups persisted for a very long time, and the dates are still debated, but it is possible that some survived surprisingly late. The story is not a single line. It is a wide, braided river. If you let your mind rest on that image, a braided river, it becomes soothing. Channels splitting, channels joining, water flowing steadily, even when the surface world looks chaotic. Erectus was one of the great channels, the one that carried humanity out across the old world. They were not alone in their time, but they were foundational. They set patterns of travel, of fire use, of tool teaching, of caring for the vulnerable. And those patterns echo forward. Tonight, as you lie there, you can imagine an Erectus group moving at dawn. The air cool, the ground firm, the light gentle. A child is carried for a while, then set down, then carried again. A hand axe is wrapped in hide and tied with plant fiber. A small ember is kept in a bundle, protected from wind. Footsteps in dust. Breath steady. No hurry. Only the long patience of survival. And in that patience, the next chapter is already forming, because the world is shifting again. Ice advancing and retreating, climates pulsing, and human populations splitting into new forms that will feel both familiar and ghostly. We will follow them next, into colder continents, into caves lit by fire, into the long twilight where more than one kind of human walked the same earth. Let us linger with that ember for a moment. Picture it resting in a nest of fibrous bark, wrapped in a fold of hide, carried close to the body where the warmth is steady. The ember is small, but it is alive. It asks for attention. A few times a day, someone opens the bundle, shields it from wind with their hands, breathes softly near it, and adds a thin curl of dry grass. The ember brightens, then settles. Smoke rises in a narrow ribbon and clings to hair and skin. That smell becomes part of camp, part of memory. When rain comes, the ember is protected like a child. When the group moves, it moves too. A moving fire, a promise that night will not be fully dark. And when they stop for the evening, the whole act of making a camp is slow, almost ceremonial. Feet press grass down. Stones are nudged into a ring. A few branches are dragged closer, their leaves brushing legs, leaving faint lines of moisture on skin. Someone kneels and places the ember in the center, then builds a small tower of fuel around it. Thin first, then thicker. Air slips between the pieces. The ember catches. A flame appears, modest, patient. It does not roar. It simply persists. Faces lean toward it, eyes reflecting light. The day loosens its grip. The hard work of walking becomes a heaviness in muscles, then a quiet softness. Breathing slows because there is nowhere to go now. Only this circle of warmth. In the firelight, tools are checked. A hand axe is turned in the palm, edge tested gently on a thumb pad. A flake tool is wiped on grass to remove fat. A child watches, copying the movement with an empty hand, opening and closing fingers as if holding an invisible stone. No one corrects the child with harshness. They simply repeat the movement again, a little slower, a little clearer. Teaching without lectures, only hands and time. Food is shared in small pieces. The best pieces go first to those who carried the heaviest loads, then to the smallest, then to the older ones. And if you listen closely, you can almost hear the small decisions being made in that distribution. Who is strong today? Who is tired? Who will need extra tomorrow? It is practical. It is also intimate. A community becomes visible in how it divides warmth and calories. The older person without teeth sits near the fire, close enough to feel heat, but not so close that the skin burns. Their mouth moves slowly. Their eyes blink often. Someone brings them softened food, a piece that has been cooked longer, scraped, broken into something the gums can manage. The helper waits, patient, watching the pace of swallowing. No rushing, no annoyance, just the steady agreement that this person remains part of the circle. Maybe they once knew the routes between waterholes. Maybe they once held a child and carried them through tall grass. Maybe they simply belong. Even in the distant past, belonging can be its own reason. The fire is lower now, but it still glows. And in that glow, the world feels older, colder, and more crowded with possibilities. Because after Homo erectus spread wide, the human family did not remain one shape. It began to branch, quietly, over long ages of ice and thaw, and each branch carried the same basic spark, and yet each learned a different way to keep it alive. Around 700,000 years ago, give or take, populations descended from earlier humans were changing again. Their brains were larger. Their bodies were strong. They hunted big animals, with coordination that required trust and timing. Some researchers call these people Homo heidelbergensis. Others use different labels. And the truth is that names are our attempt to hold a moving river in a cup. What matters is the pattern. Humans were living across different regions, and those regions were shaping them. Europe in this time could be harsh. Glaciers advanced. Winters lengthened. Food came in pulses. A summer might be generous, then a winter might take it all back. In such a world, a body that held heat had an advantage. Over many generations, European populations became more robust. Their bones thickened. Muscles grew heavier. Faces changed. Noses became larger, a passage for cold air to warm before it reached lungs. Skulls developed strong brow ridges. Brains grew large, sometimes larger on average than ours today, and in those skulls lived minds that were not simple. By around 400,000 years ago, these European humans had become what we call Neanderthals. If you imagine meeting one in firelight, you would see a person, not a beast. A broad chest, a powerful neck, a face shaped by cold and time. They were adapted to Ice Age Europe, and they were skilled. Their tools show that skill. They did not simply break rocks. They prepared cores and struck flakes in planned sequences. They made scrapers for hides, points for spears, edges for cutting. They also made composite tools, stone fixed to wood with pitch made from birch bark. To make that pitch, you must control heat with care. Not too hot, not too cool. That is chemistry learned through patience. Their hunting was intimate and dangerous. Bones carry the story. Healed fractures, broken ribs, injuries like those of modern people who come close to large animals and sometimes lose. Neanderthals hunted at close range. They faced mammoths, bison, deer, and they did it as groups. A single person cannot bring down a giant. A group can, if each member knows their role, if each member trusts the others, and they cared for one another. This is one of the most haunting parts of their story, because it feels familiar. Skeletal remains show individuals who lived long after injuries that would have made hunting impossible. People who survived with damaged limbs, with illness, with weakness. Someone fed them. Someone protected them. Someone kept them near the warmth. They also buried their dead, at least in some places, at least in some times. A body placed in the earth, not simply left. We cannot know every meaning. Some scholars argue for ritual. Others think it may have been practical, protection from scavengers. And yet even practicality can carry tenderness. To place someone carefully is to acknowledge that they were someone. There is also evidence of marks on cave walls, pigments, shapes, hands pressed to stone. Some of these marks may be older than the arrival of modern humans in those regions. The debate continues, but the possibility is quiet and powerful. If Neanderthals made symbols, then they were speaking to the dark in their own way, leaving a trace for minds that would come later. While Europe was shaping Neanderthals, Asia was holding another branch. We call them Denisovans, named for a cave in Siberia where small fragments were found. so little bone. And yet the DNA told a story, a distinct human lineage, related to Neanderthals, and yet different, spread across wide parts of Asia. We know they mattered because parts of their genetic story still live in people today. In some modern populations, gene variants linked to high-altitude survival seem to come from Denisovan ancestry, a gift from a cousin who learned to breathe thin air long before we arrived. It is strange how the smallest pieces of evidence can carry such weight. A tooth, a finger bone, a fragment of skull, and yet from these, a whole hidden people steps into view, then fades again, leaving only an echo in blood. And then there is an island story, one of the strangest. On Flores in Indonesia, a small human lived, small in stature, but not small in capability. Homo floresiensis, sometimes called the Hobbit, though that nickname can make the mind smile in a way that hides the deeper truth. They made tools. They hunted. They used fire. They lived in isolation, surrounded by sea. For long ages, resources were limited. Evolution tends to shrink bodies on islands. Over generations, the shape changed. A human line became tiny, and yet remained human. Imagine them in a cave, listening to rain on leaves, hearing waves far away, watching a small flame in the dark, knowing nothing of the larger continents where other humans walked. For a time, the world held several kinds of humans at once. Neanderthals in Europe and Western Asia, Denisovans across parts of Asia, the small island humans on Flores, and in Africa, another line was changing toward the form we recognize most easily. Homo sapiens. The earliest fossils of our kind appear in Africa hundreds of thousands of years ago. The dates shift as discoveries and methods improve, but the pattern is steady. Faces become more delicate. Skulls become more rounded. Brains are large. The body is built for endurance and heat management. And yet, early sapiens were not immediately the dominant force we imagine. For a long time, they were one human among others, living in Africa, hunting, gathering, surviving. Then the world tightened around them. Climate shifted. Resources fluctuated. And at some point, Homo sapiens experienced a narrow passage, a bottleneck, a time when numbers may have fallen dangerously low. Different scholars debate the details and the exact causes, but the idea remains. There were moments when our species might have vanished, quietly, without ceremony, leaving no one to remember. And still, they persisted. Groups spread across Africa. Some lived near coasts and learned the rhythm of tides. Some lived near rivers and learned the timing of rains. Tools diversified. Pigments appear. Shells are carried far from the sea. These are small objects, but they suggest something large inside the mind. The ability to let objects stand for meaning, the start of symbols carried between people. Then, around 60 to 70,000 years ago, modern humans began to leave Africa in a sustained way. They crossed into Arabia. They followed coasts. They moved in small steps that became long journeys. And when they entered lands beyond Africa, they did not enter empty space. They entered the territories of cousins. In the Middle East and Europe, they met Neanderthals, not always as enemies, not always as strangers who stayed distant. Sometimes there was contact close enough to create children. The evidence is in our genomes. Many people alive today carry a small percentage of Neanderthal ancestry. That means that for a time, families were mixed. A child with features from both lines. A child who grew, who had children, who passed those genes onward. It is a quiet form of survival. Not survival as a separate people, but survival as a thread woven into another cloth. In parts of Asia, humans also met Denisovans. And again, there was mixing. A few percent of DNA in some populations points back to those encounters. And those inherited genes could be useful. Skin and hair variants for new sunlight levels. Immune genes for unfamiliar pathogens. Altitude adaptations for thin air. Interbreeding, in this sense, was not only romance. It was adaptation, a merging of solutions. But the world did not keep its human diversity. By around 40,000 years ago, Neanderthals were disappearing. The reasons remain debated. Climate instability, competition for resources, differences in population size, possible disease exchange, assimilation through interbreeding. The truth may be a braided set of causes, not one simple event. What is clear is that their distinct culture, their distinct form, faded. The caves grew quiet. The tools changed. The people who remained were mostly sapiens, carrying small pieces of Neanderthal history inside them. Denisovans also faded from view. We see them through genetics and through fragments, and then the trail goes dark. Homo floresiensis disappears too, perhaps around 50,000 years ago, perhaps later, and again, the causes are uncertain. Changing climate, volcanic events, new arrivals. A small island population can be fragile. A few bad years can end a line that lasted for hundreds of thousands. So by the time humans painted deep caves with confident hands, by the time they carried beads and carved figures, by the time they spread across Eurasia and then into the Americas, one kind of human remained in the world in a visible way. And yet, even that one kind is not pure. We are a blend. A modern body with ancient threads. A face that carries a hint of a cousin. A lung that benefits from an old adaptation. A skin gene that once helped a stranger survive in a place we now call home. There is a sadness in that. To know that the earth once held multiple human ways of being. Different bodies, different minds, different cultures, and now we cannot meet them. We can only infer. We can only imagine. We can only listen to the hush of museums, the dust on bones, the cold air in caves. And still, there is also a strange comfort, because those cousins are not entirely gone. They are inside us, in small fractions, in silent instructions inside cells. They are in the fact that we can live in cold, in heat, in high mountains, in islands, in deserts. They are in the old lesson that survival is not always a victory parade. Sometimes it is simply a merging, a soft blending, a quiet continuation under a different name. Now let the fire settle again. Let the last sparks drift upward. In the next stretch of the story, the world fills with modern humans moving fast, carrying art and language, and also carrying a shadow. Because wherever we arrived, the largest animals often vanished, and the shape of ecosystems changed. We will walk into that era slowly and gently, and see how dominance began, and what it cost. If you were standing here with me, close to the hearth, I would point to a simple thought that always feels strange. These meetings were not meetings of monsters. They were meetings of people. A modern human group arrives at a valley where smoke rises from a cave mouth. They smell it first, a faint bitterness in the air. They see footprints in mud near a stream. They find scraped hides drying on branches. The signs are clear. Someone is here. Approach would be cautious. Bodies tense. Hands ready. Not because the others are inhuman, but because any unknown group can mean danger. And yet, danger is not the only possibility. Trade can happen. Observation can happen. A shared hunt can happen. A night by fire can happen, with the awkwardness of different voices, different rhythms, different faces reflecting the same flame. If that happened even once, it would leave no fossil record of feelings. But it could leave a child, and that child is the trace that matters most, because it means the gap between us was never absolute. I have always found it unsettling in a quiet way, that extinction can be so gentle. Not a single dramatic ending, but a slow thinning, groups becoming smaller. Winter after winter. A few elders lost. A few babies not born. A hunting ground taken by others. A disease that moves through a camp. A cave that stays empty after a storm. Eventually, there is no one left to speak the old songs. No one left to teach the old tool patterns. And the world goes on. The fire has grown quiet, but the room is not empty. It is full of slow heat and the soft crackle of wood settling into itself. Now the story moves into the age when only one kind of human remains clearly on the surface of the world. And that is not a triumph as clean as it sounds. It is a thinning, a narrowing, a long corridor where many footsteps once echoed. Modern humans spread outward, not as an army, not as a single wave, but as countless small decisions repeated by families and friends. A camp choosing to follow the coast because shellfish are reliable. A band choosing to follow a river because the water remembers the path even when the sky forgets. Generation after generation, people moved. Sometimes they moved because hunger pushed. Sometimes because curiosity pulled. Sometimes because a drought made the old place feel too quiet, too brittle. And slowly, the map filled. Across Arabia and into South Asia, humans followed shorelines where the sea offered a steady rhythm. On a coast, you can read the tide. You can find pools after the water withdraws. You can collect what you need without chasing it. The sand holds footprints for a moment, then wind erases them, and the world feels forgiving. But it is also demanding, because storms can arrive without warning, and a group must learn the moods of water and sky. Farther east, the journey reached islands. And this is one of those points in the story that always makes the mind pause. Because to reach certain lands, People had to cross open water. No land bridge, no easy stepping stones, just a horizon and a decision. A raft made from bundled reeds, a log shaped by stone tools, a canoe-like shell of wood. Whatever the earliest boats were, they carried something fragile: human breath, human warmth, human hope. A crossing could take hours, maybe days. A crossing could end in silence if the weather turned. And yet it happened, because people arrived in Australia and New Guinea long ago, and they built lives there. When humans reached those new lands, they stepped into ecosystems that had never met a predator like them. Large animals that had evolved without fearing coordinated hunters could be slow to learn. Some scholars argue that climate change was already stressing many species, and that humans simply arrived at the worst time. Others argue that hunting pressure was decisive, that even a small increase in mortality can tip a slow-breeding large animal into collapse. We cannot be sure of the exact balance, but the pattern repeats often enough to feel like a shadow that follows our species. Where humans arrive, the largest animals tend to disappear soon after. In Australia, giant marsupials vanished. In the Americas, mammoths and mastodons vanished. In many places, large flightless birds vanished. The world became quieter in certain ways. The ground lost the heavy footsteps that once shaped vegetation. The predators that depended on those giants lost their food. The plants that depended on grazing and trampling changed their patterns. An ecosystem is a web, and when a heavy strand is cut, the vibration travels. It is unsettling because it suggests that long before cities and machines, humans already had the power to change the world. Not with intention to destroy, more like a child stepping into a delicate room and touching everything, not knowing how fragile the ornaments are. The dark part is not cruelty alone. The dark part is the gap between capacity and understanding. A group hunts a large animal because the meat is rich and the risk feels worth it. The group celebrates. They share. They survive. They do not see that repeating this season after season can empty the land. They do not yet have the long, wide lens. They live close to the day, close to the body. And still, humans kept moving. Into Europe, where the light was different and the winters could be sharp. Into the far north, where cold can carve the air into knives. Into the forests, where leaves can hide danger. Into the deserts, where the horizon can look like an empty promise. Everywhere, people learned. They changed clothing. They changed shelters. They changed tools. They changed stories. In Europe, after the last Neanderthal groups faded, sapiens culture began to bloom in ways that are visible to us. Cave walls gained animals that seemed to move in torchlight. Hands were pressed to stone, a simple sign that someone existed and wanted the rock to remember. Small figures were carved. Music entered the world in the form of flutes made from bone. These are fragile objects, yet they survived, and when we see them, we feel the intimacy of minds long gone. A person sat in a cave, scraped a bone, shaped holes, blew air, and heard a sound become a melody. That melody vanished into air, but the instrument remained. Art is not only beauty. It is a technology of memory and belonging. A mark on a wall can say, "This place is ours. This story is ours. These animals feed us. These spirits frighten us. These patterns calm us." It can bind a group. It can carry meaning across generations. And meaning can be a form of survival because it keeps people together when the world is cold. Humans also traded. Stone from one region appears far from its source. Shells travel inland. Pigments move across distance. This suggests networks, not large empires, but friendships between groups, agreements, marriages, exchanges. A group that suffers a drought can remember another place, another people, and the path to them. Trade is not only objects, it is a map of trust. Then, around 20,000 years ago, give or take, humans crossed into the Americas. Whether by land, bridge, by coastal routes, or by both, remains debated. But the outcome is clear. People reached a new continent, and they spread astonishingly fast. From the far north to the far south, humans moved through mountains, plains, forests, and deserts. They adapted to ice edges, to rivers, to high altitudes, to tropical heat. They became many cultures in a short time because language and teaching allow change to move faster than genes. And again, the large animals disappeared. Some places hold bones with cut marks. Some places hold hunting tools. Some places show climate shifts that could have stressed populations. The debate continues, but the pattern feels heavy. A world that once carried many giants became a world of smaller creatures. Humans remained. The silence of vanished species became part of the landscape. By about 12,000 years ago, another shift began. In several regions, people started to plant seeds deliberately. They started to keep animals close. They began agriculture. It did not happen once. It happened many times, in different ways, with different plants and different animals. In the Middle East, wheat and barley. In China, rice and millet. In Mesoamerica, maize and beans and squash. In the Andes, potatoes. Each region found what the land offered and shaped it slowly. A wild plant becomes a crop by 1,000 small choices. Which seeds to keep, which ones to plant, which ones to discard. Agriculture can feel like comfort because it promises predictability, but it also carries a darker bargain. When you plant, you stay. When you stay, you build. When you build, you defend. When you defend, conflict grows. A mobile group can walk away from a bad season. A farming village cannot. A farming village must endure and fight for its fields. A farming village must store food and guard it. And where food is stored, power gathers. Surplus allows specialization. Some people become builders. Some become priests. Some become soldiers. Some become scribes. And once writing appears, memory leaves the body and enters clay. Reed, stone. A thought can outlive the thinker. This is a kind of magic. It is also a kind of trap, because written power can persist even when the people under it change. A law carved in stone does not soften when a child cries. Cities rise. Walls rise. Temples rise. And with them, hierarchy rises. The gap between those who have and those who do not can widen. In small bands, most people are close to equal because there is little to hoard. In a city, wealth can pile up like grain in a granary. Some people sleep under roofs of stone. Some sleep near the edge of the wall. Some eat well. Some do not. This is not a failure of intelligence. It is a side effect of scale. It is what happens when a species built for small groups learns to live in crowds. Disease also changes. In dense populations, pathogens spread more easily. When people live close, when animals live close, new illnesses emerge. Some are acute, burning through bodies quickly. Some become chronic, grinding life down slowly. For many generations, children die more often. The human story is not a steady climb. It is always mixed with loss. And yet, the same cities create art and mathematics and medicine. The same hierarchy funds monuments. The same surplus feeds minds that can spend time thinking. It is a trade. Comfort for constraint. Stability for vulnerability. A harvest can feed many, but a failed harvest can starve many. A kingdom can protect, but it can also demand obedience. The dark part is that the tools of civilization can be used to lift and to crush, often at the same time. As you rest here, you can feel how strange it is that so much of this story is carried in small moments. A seed pressed into soil. A stone flake struck from a core. A child listening to an elder speak. A fire kept alive through rain. A body placed in the earth with care. These moments do not look like destiny. They look like ordinary survival. And yet, out of ordinary survival, the world we know emerged. The story is moving toward the present now, toward the time when humans became the dominant force on the planet. But dominance is not a crown. It is a weight. In the next part, we will hold that weight gently and look at what it means to be a species that can change its own future and also has to live with the shadows of its past. If you were standing here with me, you might hear the small sounds that belong to deep time. A quiet tap of stone on stone. The soft hiss of fat dripping into ash. The distant breath of a river beyond the dark. And you might notice how often our story is written in clay, because the earliest cities did not begin with marble or iron. They began with mud. Hands scooped it, pressed it, shaped it into bricks, left it in the sun until it hardened. Mud became wall. Wall became room. Room became a place where a child could sleep without climbing a tree. When people tried to keep track of surplus, they turned to clay again. A tablet is only a handful of earth, smoothed, damp, waiting. A reed stylus presses marks into it. Wedge shapes that turn grain into number, promises into record. Records can feel like safety, but records also create new kinds of fear. A tax list is also a net. A debt tablet is also a chain. The rivers shaped this. A river rises and falls. It floods and leaves behind silt, a dark layer of fertility. It also destroys. Water gives and water takes. So people built canals. They dug with hands and simple tools. They moved earth until their backs ached. And because water is life, those who controlled water held power. Outside the walls, the old world still moved. Predators still walked. Bands still traveled. A farmer could look at the horizon and know that beyond the fields there were people who did not plant, who carried their homes in their minds. And always, the old instincts traveled with us. The nervous glance over the shoulder, the comfort of a warm body nearby in the dark. Even in a crowded place, the mind searches for a small circle, for faces that feel familiar. So as we move toward the final part, let the room grow softer. Let the fire glow lower. Let your jaw loosen. Let the breath settle into a slow, steady rhythm. You do not need to solve the whole story tonight. You only need to feel how long it is, and how gently it can hold you. Somewhere, far ahead in time, those clay tablets will sit in museum hush. Dust will gather on glass. A visitor will lean close and see the pressed marks, and feel a shiver, because a hand from 5,000 years ago is still reaching forward. It is the same with bones in drawers, and footprints in ancient ash, and charcoal on cave walls. The past does not speak loudly. It whispers through material that refused to vanish, and when you listen in the right, quiet way, the whisper becomes a comfort, because it says that even fragile things can last, and even short lives can leave gentle weight on the world. So rest with that thought. Your own breath is part of the same long chain, a warm, small proof that the story continued. And in the next part, we will let the chain come all the way to this moment and set it down carefully. The candlelight holds steady, and the river breath feels close, as if water and time are the same slow thing. Now, the fire is lower now, and the light on the walls moves slowly, like a thought that does not want to hurry. This is where the long road reaches the room you are in, not as a sudden arrival, but as a gentle return. You are here, in a world that glows with cities and humming machines. There are satellites above the clouds, and cables under the sea, and lights on roads that look like rivers of moving stars. It can feel normal, because you were born into it. But when you remember the whole story, it becomes strange again. A small primate looking out from a branch, learning depth, learning grip, learning how not to fall. That line leads to you, and if you let yourself feel it, you might sense the dark wonder in it, because so much could have ended. So many branches did end. So many cousins vanished. So many animals that once filled the world with heavy footsteps are quiet now. And still the line continued. Honestly, I think the most haunting part is not any single catastrophe. It is the sheer narrowness of survival. How often a species can be reduced to scattered groups, each one a flickering ember in a wide night. How easily an illness, a drought, a storm, a famine can erase a whole way of being. When we talk about deep time, we imagine strength, but deep time is also fragile. It is dust and bone and chance. And yet, a human mind learned to stack small advantages. A better tool, a better story, a better alliance, a better way to keep a fire from dying in the rain, a better way to share food so the weak did not fall behind. These were not grand miracles. They were small, repeated acts. When the modern world arrived, it arrived the same way, not as one invention, but as layers. Farming, writing, cities, trade routes, empires, ships, gunpowder, printing, factories, electricity, vaccines, computers, each layer resting on the ones beneath. A pyramid of knowledge. And like any pyramid, it casts a shadow. The shadow is that our old instincts are still inside us. We still look for tribes. We still fear outsiders. We still crave status. We still feel the thrill of winning and the ache of being left out. These feelings helped small groups survive. In a global world, they can cause harm because the scale is larger and the tools are sharper. A rumor can travel faster than a human body ever could. A weapon can kill from far away. A decision in one room can change lives across oceans. The power is enormous. The wisdom is not always equal to it. Another shadow is that we have become an ecological force. We cut forests. We move rivers. We burn ancient carbon and change the air. We pull life from the sea. We build roads that split habitats. We spread species into places they never lived before. Sometimes we do it to survive. Sometimes to grow rich. Sometimes simply because we can. The planet can feel like a tool in our hands. This is where the story becomes quietly eerie. Because evolution shaped us to solve immediate problems. Find food. Find water. Protect kin. The climate system does not respond immediately. A forest can vanish in a season, but the full consequences can unfold slowly. A warming world can feel like a gentle shift at first, then become a cascade. It is the same pattern as those old megafauna losses. Capacity outrunning foresight. The difference is scale. Now the whole planet is the room. But there is another side. We also carry the ability to learn, to change, to tell new stories. We can look back and see patterns. We can measure the air. We can count the disappearing species. We can admit mistakes, at least sometimes. We can cooperate beyond kin. This is rare in nature, and it is not guaranteed, but it is possible. It helps to remember that biology did not split humanity into separate kinds. We are one species. The differences we see, skin, hair, body shape, are small adjustments to sunlight, temperature, disease, diet, maps written on the body. Not ladders, not ranks, just adaptation. And under those surface changes, the same deep wiring for language and laughter and grief. The same vulnerable brain that dreams. We are still evolving, even now. not always in obvious ways. Some traits spread because they fit new diets. Some because they help resist old diseases. Some because modern life changes which bodies survive to have children. But in many places, culture has taken the steering wheel. We change our environment faster than genes can change us. That is our gift and our danger. Sometimes I imagine a far future, not to predict it, but to feel the scale. A being descended from us, looking back at our time, the way we look back at stone tools. They might call us primitive. They might pity our confusion, or they might envy our closeness to the living world. We cannot know. We only know that change keeps moving. If you listen closely, you might notice that the most constant thing in the whole story is not progress. It is rhythm, breath, hunger, warmth, cold, day and night, a fire that needs tending, a child that needs care, a mind that seeks meaning. Even in a city of glass and steel, those rhythms remain. Your body still wants water. Your lungs still want air. Your nervous system still wants safety. So let us give it some safety now. Let the room be dim. Let your shoulders drop. Let your tongue rest. Let the muscles around your eyes soften. Feel the weight of your body where it meets the bed. If there are thoughts moving through you, let them pass like small animals at the edge of a campfire. You do not need to chase them. Think of the ancestors who survived storms in caves and walked under strange stars and carried stories in their mouths because there was no paper yet. They are not watching you. They are not judging you. They are simply part of you, a quiet inheritance. And you do not have to do anything with it tonight. You can let it be. You can let the long chain rest. Outside your room, the world is still turning. Rivers are still breathing. Dust is still settling on old stone. Somewhere, a museum guard walks slowly past glass cases, and the bones inside lie in silence, patient, as if they have all the time in the world. In a way, they do. And in that patience, there is calm. There is one more dark thread worth touching, gently, before we sleep. It is the way success can turn into forgetfulness. When a species becomes safe, it can forget what danger taught. When food arrives through systems, the body forgets the old scarcity, and the mind begins to believe the world will always provide. But the world does not promise that. It only repeats patterns until something breaks. You know that feeling when a storm is coming, and the air changes, even before the first raindrop. The skin notices. The animals notice. The leaves flip their pale undersides toward the sky. That old sensitivity is still in you. It is why a sudden noise can wake you, why an unfamiliar shadow can tighten your chest. It is ancient. It kept people alive. In a modern room, it can become anxiety, a false alarm system ringing in a place that is mostly safe. So, be kind to it. It is not broken. It is simply old. For most of our history, a human life was lived close to the edge. A cut could become an infection. A fever could take a child. A winter could take a whole camp. We forget this because our memories are short and our comforts are loud. But if you walked through a cemetery from 300 years ago, you would see the small stones, the tiny names, the years that never reached adulthood. That is what disease once did to us. Then a few quiet revolutions arrived. Clean water, soap, vaccines, antibiotics. Not perfect, not universal, but powerful. And with that change, population grew, crowds grew, cities grew. A human brain evolved for 50 faces now lives among thousands, sometimes millions. It is easy to feel alone in that, a body surrounded by people, yet hungry for a small circle. This is why we still gather in rooms, why we still tell stories, why we still seek a voice at night that sounds human, slow, patient, present. We are social animals. We need warmth that is not only temperature. In old camps, warmth came from fire and bodies. In old temples, warmth came from ritual and shared breath. In old villages, warmth came from familiarity and repeated names. Tonight, warmth can come from the simple truth that you are not a strange accident. You are a continuation, a creature shaped by countless acts of care. Someone carried someone. Someone fed someone. Someone kept watch while others slept. The chain is made of those ordinary mercies, even the darker parts of our story. The wars, the hierarchies, the exploitation. They come from human minds trying to solve problems, often in clumsy ways, often with fear driving the hand. Fear of hunger, fear of rivals, fear of being powerless. Fear can build walls. Fear can build weapons. Fear can also build cooperation when people choose to face it together. We are capable of both. That is part of what makes the story feel eerie. The same hands that shape a flute can shape a blade. The same mouth that sings can shout orders. The same brain that dreams can justify cruelty. None of this is destiny. It is potential. And potential can be guided. Some scholars argue that what truly separated our species was not just brain size, but our ability to share intention, to point and mean, look there, to tell a child, do it like this, to imagine a future and invite others into that imagination. That shared imagination can create myths. It can create laws. It can create money. It can create nations. It can create religions. These things are not physical like stone, but they move people like physical forces. They can comfort. They can terrify. They can bind strangers into a single group. They can also divide groups into enemies. The power is in the shared belief. And because belief is powerful, it can be manipulated. This is another quiet tragedy. A story can be used to heal or to control. A list on clay can become a tool of fairness or a tool of extraction. A border can protect or it can trap. A name can honor or it can erase. History is full of these double edges. If you feel the weight of it, that is normal. You are sensitive to meaning. That sensitivity is a human trait. Now we stand in a time when we can edit genes, we can change plants and animals with intention. We can even imagine changing ourselves. It is debated how far we will go and how wise we will be. But the very fact that we can ask the question is astonishing. For millions of years, evolution acted on us without our consent. Now we are beginning to act back. Creator and created folding into one. It is a mythic shape, the old story, returning in a new costume. And still, the body remains simple. A heart that beats. A brain that needs sleep. A nervous system that calms when the breathing slows. No technology removes that. Even the most powerful minds in history still had to close their eyes at night. Even kings, even generals, even scientists. Sleep is the oldest equalizer. So let this part be about returning from the vastness to the small, from continents to a single room, from deep time to this breath, from questions, hey there, come a little closer to the fire. Let the room be dim. Let the candlelight stay low. And let the modern world loosen its grip on you, one quiet breath at a time. Right now, there are more than 8 billion of us, scattered across the planet like warm lanterns in the dark. Tokyo and Toronto, Lagos and London, islands and deserts, mountain towns and river cities, even research stations on frozen white coasts where almost nothing should live. We have built towers that glitter. We have sent machines beyond the moon. We have mapped the letters inside our own cells. We have learned to split invisible atoms. And we have taught small pieces of metal and light to carry voices across oceans. It sounds like destiny when you say it quickly, as if it was always meant to happen. But it almost did not happen. Not even close. I want to tell you a darker truth tonight. A quiet truth that sits under all our bright achievements. For most of the last 7 million years, there was nothing inevitable about us. There were forests that could have swallowed our line and erased it. Droughts that could have thinned us to nothing. Predators that could have ended the experiment before it ever learned its own name. There were cousins, many cousins, who walked on 2 legs and looked toward the horizon, and then vanished into dust.